Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, November 15th, 2018. Snow day here at Kagro in the Morning World headquarters. That means the kids are at home, and so who knows what you'll be hearing in the background today. And, wow. So, you know what? Actually, I just see Brian McFadden here tweeting that he doesn't have a commute, so he doesn't care if it snows. It's the one remaining benefit, he says, of working from home. I say no. I have found myself growing jealous of the kids. Like, oh, it's snowing, I should be able to sleep in and not do a show. And then, I don't know if I would feel better not doing a show, but I would feel better sleeping in, I think, briefly. And then I would say, oh, there's this story I want to talk about. Ah, there's another story I want to talk about. And as with every day, that is absolutely true today. I don't even know where to begin. We are without Greg Dworkin today. He's got some work obligations. He'll be lecturing people about the flu and how to get it. And I don't really know why that's absolutely necessary, but apparently it's a big deal over there in Connecticut that everybody get instructions on how to get the flu. I didn't realize this was a thing, but it is. I don't know whether they're snowed out, but I don't think so. It is, by the way, warmer and raining in Reykjavik, Iceland right now than, it's warmer than it is here. Of course, it's later in the day there, I suppose. And so, just a, brief note, the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, I guess the same weather as Reykjavik, Iceland, and everything's fine. Many directions we could be going today. Couldn't you just spend all day on the fact that Donald Trump apparently thinks you need to show picture ID to buy cereal in this country? That's probably not a story we're going to be reading a great deal into because it involves an interview by the Daily Caller, although I guess you could read it for the surprise value that the Daily Caller would print such an interview without doing anything to edit it to make the president look better, but I don't know exactly what would be behind that agenda. Other things to catch up on, of course, 10 other ways the president is incredibly stupid. Should we bother listing them? I don't know. The big talk of the day, you know what? I was going to say, I guess the big in-depth story of the day that most people are talking about would be the Facebook story in the New York Times, and I had missed that story as of, I guess, last night. But I had it brought to my attention. I could hardly have missed it, I suppose. That wasn't going to happen. But Sponson, who alerts us to a lot of our stories through the KITM hashtag, sent us a clip from it. And it's a huge, long, rambling story and probably deserves a show or 15 to parse through. And that's what it would probably take. I'm not certain whether or not that's something I want to dive into or not. But he brought us a very particular clip from it, and I don't know whether we do ourselves any favors by dashing straight to it and either letting it stand without the rest of the context of the story, or whether the context would matter. I'm not entirely sure, but it didn't look good. And where is this clip? I'm pretty certain if I scroll enough, I'll come up with it, but for some reason it's not immediately presenting itself to me. But the part of the story, as I recall, that he was talking about here, I know I should be able to come up with this because I did respond to him about it, was the involvement of Chuck Schumer in the, what would we say, the rolling defense of Facebook in some of their worst moments, and apparently this being driven at least in part by the fact that his daughter works for Facebook, which is probably, it's not a super great look. And of course, it did color the discussion yesterday of where can I look for this thing? Of the leadership contests. And we have to update the news on those as well. But people pointing out quite correctly that it's somewhat ironic to see this news break about Facebook, who I don't think anybody is really happy with at this point, being supported by Chuck Schumer, and not for great reasons, and then having Schumer roll on to reclaiming his leadership spot by acclamation, versus having someone like Nancy Pelosi, who has some pretty significant accomplishments under her belt as Speaker, have to fight her way back into leadership, and hey, we're not even sure whether or not that's going to work at this point. Yeah, here's the clip that Sponson sent to me and to Greg. Schumer, with the suggestion that Schumer should resign immediately and he should also be indicted. Well, I don't know if you're going to get to indictment. You're probably not going to get to a resignation either, but that's, I guess, the better suggestion of the two. Although I'll hold my cards for the moment. I have skimmed the story, and it may take us 18 to 20 hours to get to the part where this comes up. So let's just blurt this part out here. The screen grab that Sponson sent on to us, if you haven't read the story, says, in at least one instance, the company, and again, here we're talking about Facebook, also relied on Mr. Schumer, the New York senator and Senate Democratic leader. He has long worked to advance Silicon Valley's interests, and there's no crime in that, although it's not where I would necessarily position myself. Advance Silicon Valley's interests on issues such as commercial drone regulations and patent reform. During the 2016 election cycle, he raised more money from Facebook employees than any other member of Congress, according to the Center for Responsive Politics. Mr. Schumer also has a personal connection to Facebook. His daughter, Allison, joined the firm out of college and is now a marketing manager in Facebook's New York office, according to her LinkedIn profile. In July, as Facebook's troubles threatened to cost the company billions of dollars in market value, Mr. Schumer confronted Mr. Warner, and here we're talking about Virginia Senator Mark Warner, by then Facebook's most insistent inquisitor in Congress. Here again, in the context of the Trump-Russia investigation, how much of a role did Facebook play in carrying forward Russian-sponsored, Russian-linked propaganda, we might as well say Republican-linked propaganda, in order to influence and confuse the election. Okay, so back off, he told Mr. Warner. This wasn't a quote, but back off, he told Mr. Warner, according to a Facebook employee briefed on Mr. Schumer's intervention. Mr. Warner should be looking for ways to work with Facebook, Mr. Schumer advised, not harm it. Facebook lobbyists were kept abreast of Mr. Schumer's efforts to protect the company, according to the employee. We'll have to see as time goes on exactly how accurate a depiction of what happened that is. But I can say at this point, even without necessarily calling for anyone's indictment or resignation, that seems less than optimal. And you're not really going to want that story on the front page. Although I guess, as far as Schumer's concerned, from his perspective, better now than before he was reelected to the leadership position by acclamation. So there's an awful lot in that story, and I've seen an awful lot of different takes on the story. A couple of tweets that grabbed my attention about it. Well, first of all, was the tweet from Helene Olin, a blogger for Washington Post Opinions, as she identifies herself here. Good morning, and ha ha ha, everyone who ever thought Mark Zuckerberg or Sheryl Sandberg of Facebook were presidential material. That's a good point. I'd forgotten about that, at least briefly, since there's been so many stories about people who considered themselves presidential material who have since fallen apart. Donald Trump being one of them, of course. And Michael Avenatti also in the news. And I didn't even bother grabbing any stories to report on that situation. But in case you hadn't heard, he apparently found himself on they're both wrong sides to get caught on in a a felony indictment for alleged domestic abuse. I didn't read about the story. I simply read about people reading about the story and saying, well, that's it for his presidential ambitions. And then I remembered that Donald Trump was president, and I am not 100% certain that that will do the trick. Not a Michael Avenatti fan, but I also I don't feel the need to spend any time vilifying the guy. I don't care. I don't think he's going anywhere. He's been valuable for certain things and would likely not make a good candidate for president. And I think that's a fair way to feel about him. And as I mentioned, I'm probably not going to discuss it that much more because I just don't know enough about it. And, well, like I said, there's no right side that you want to be on in a domestic violence, case. I mean, you don't want to be the person perpetrating. Obviously, that would be the worst of the two places to be in terms of moral culpability, but like I didn't want to fall into the trap of saying the wrong end of one of these things. They're both wrong ends. The other tweet that caught my eye about the Facebook story comes from another writer, Elizabeth Pecciuto. Pecciuto? How does she say her name? I don't know. I'll ask her. Elizabeth? Listening, not hearing an answer. Writer and associate editor with Arc Digital, and has had her byline appear in places like the Daily Beast and the LA Times. Ooh, a philosophy PhD as well. So she says, reading the Facebook story now, another facet, or she is reading it now, and another facet of the story is that there's another case of an organization run more by liberals who are terrified of conservative media and bend over backwards to please it. And I think even if we can't get all the way through the story, or even most of the way through the story, that's probably an important perspective to start with that rings true to me, not having read the story just yet, but just rings true to me in general. Well, that would be easy to believe, I think, about the people running Facebook. Let's see. Other short bits here and there. I mean, really, if we get into the Facebook story, we'll never get out of it. And maybe we'll reserve that for later on in the show, then try and get through a couple of other pieces here. I mentioned the leadership contests, and we'll definitely want to get to more information about that. What I didn't do, let's see, I should probably find out whether anybody had any other suggestions about more stuff to discuss today. Like, for instance, whether it be serious or otherwise. The Mighty OCD, for instance, suggesting that today's show I will try to buy some sugar smacks, but they've hidden my cereal ID. Let's see what happens. And Bill suggesting that I would be putting Trumpy Bear in a headlock and give it a swirly. So that may be an idea as well. My goodness, Trumpy Bear. I can't believe I live in a world where that's really true. But okay. Let's see. I'll catch up with a couple of these other comments in a few minutes here. Matt Fuller's tweet caught my eye as well, and I think Benji Sarlin called that tweet out as particularly surprising. He is the Huffington Post, or now HuffPost, Congress reporter, one of them. Multiple Democratic members who publicly support Pelosi are speculating to me on background that she doesn't have the numbers and can't get there. That is very interesting, and a storyline that we haven't heard yet, and opens us up to the possibility that we may need to consider what would happen in that case. And I've been following as best I can the various goings on in this story, and we still come back to the problem that there isn't anyone. Well, there really isn't anyone else running for the speakership, for one thing. No one has said that they're in for it, and that's a problem. Although, the initial round, the initial voting that'll have to take place inside the Democratic caucus, I mean, there's no formal rule that says by a certain date you have to have declared or anything like that. It's usually the case that early movers do better in general. But it usually doesn't matter a great deal how early you move if there's an incumbent in the job. Anyway, they're still casting about for a name to land on, but they're still saying, and I should say, when I say they are still saying, I mean that, again, we have to reiterate, there are opponents of Pelosi's election as Speaker who are outright opposed to her serving, continuing to serve as Speaker, and they, generally speaking, tend to be coming from Pelosi's right. They are Democrats, but they are coming from Pelosi's right on this question. Then there's a not inconsiderable cohort of those who would consider themselves to be to Pelosi's left, and there's not a whole hell of a lot of territory to her left. She's not super liberal or anything. It's just among actual people who've made it to membership in Congress, there's not that vast a field out there who are consistently and on every voting question to Nancy Pelosi's left. But there are several. And they oppose Pelosi more in the sense that they were unwilling during the, or outright hostile to the idea, even in some cases, of endorsing her continuance as Democratic leader, whatever the outcome of the elections, should they themselves be elected to Congress. And it's been much more overt on the right that they actually oppose, having to serve under her as Speaker. Not that they would be resigning. They think she's the one that needs to go, obviously. But whereas opposition from the left has been framed, I think, with good reason and carefully, in most cases anyway, that they would be open to the idea of exploring new leadership, or that generally it was their opinion that new leadership would be desirable, though they didn't have any names necessarily about who should take those slots, although occasionally some of them would offer up a name or two when pressed. Anyway, the only real danger to her returning to the speakership would be if there were dissident Democrats willing to vote on the floor for some other person, and that if there were enough of them who would affirmatively vote for someone else to give us the outcome that a majority of those present and casting votes voted for some other, one single member. You have to end up with a majority of those present and casting votes, and that number can change if you abstain in some way, or you're present on the floor and you vote present rather than giving us a name. In other words, it's not necessarily the case that 218 votes does the trick. It's a majority of those present and casting votes. But, with a sizable enough splinter group, you could conceivably throw the speakership to, if you, for whatever reason, you thought it was wise to throw it to a Republican, you could do that. I don't know that there are any members of the splinter Democrats who actually would consider doing such a thing or think it would be wise strategically to do so. I think that they are trying instead to try and, I guess their plan is to withhold their votes and then throw it to a second ballot in some way, and then try and get Democrats to coalesce around some other candidate. And I guess names are being thrown around, and people are actually landing on Steny Hoyer, because he would be, I don't know why him. That's the thing. He's next in line in the leadership, but if the idea is fresh faces for leadership, Steny Hoyer isn't really likely to be that guy either. So that doesn't make a great deal of sense. And the idea that other members of Congress who haven't been in leadership should step in at this point, some of them might be competent to handle the job, but it's an awfully demanding role. And then, and it's doubly so with Donald Trump in office, with Mitch McConnell returning to leadership in the Senate. I'm not saying that Nancy Pelosi is the only person who can do it, but it's a lot more complicated of a role than simply being the voice of Democrats on television. That's something you can appoint somebody to take that job, even if Nancy Pelosi is handling the day-to-day managing of the levers of power from the Speaker's office. There's a lot that goes on in that office, and a lot that has to do with behind-the-scenes work that you have to be pretty knowledgeable to handle successfully. Witness what has happened to the last couple of Republicans who tried to do the job thinking that all you needed to do was either be a competent spokesperson for the Republican Party position, or all you had to do was be a fresh face. Some of the most ineffective speakers of the modern era have come out of that mold and have resigned or retired to relative obscurity, let's say. All right. Well, many other stories that require our time. Let's see. I've seen a couple of them here, and, let's see. We'll recap a couple of these other things. Here's some other short bits. This is an interesting piece of news, as reported by Raw Story, and we'll hope it doesn't freeze my computer in any way to open up this story by Brad Reed. One of the developments you may have missed in the Jim Acosta White House confrontation. CNN has filed suit over the barring of Jim Acosta from the White House press room and his loss of the so-called hard pass that allowed him into the White House to join the press briefings. And interestingly, Fox News, because it considers itself a news organization, has joined with CNN's effort in filing an amicus brief on behalf of CNN's Jim Acosta. And that has taken some people by surprise. It's interesting that they would do it. I thought that they would not. But I guess, they have an interest in maintaining the appearance of being a news organization. And I don't know whether there's anybody there who genuinely believes that that's true and that that's why they're doing this, or whether they just think it makes a good facade. But they are doing it. And to no one's surprise, that has caught their fans by surprise. Fox News viewers, apparently some of them furious with Fox News for having done this. I mean, for all the time that Trump has spent demonizing CNN and Jim Acosta in particular, I guess it should not shock us that this is be the case. Brad Reed's story begins this way. Fox News fans are not happy that their favorite network is filing an amicus brief on behalf of CNN's Jim Acosta, who had his White House press pass revoked by the Trump administration last week. Fox News supports CNN in its legal effort to regain its White House reporters' press credentials, Fox News President Jay Wallace said on Tuesday. Secret Service passes for White House journalists should never be weaponized. After Fox News media critic Howard Kurtz tweeted out Wallace's announcement that his network would be supporting Acosta's challenge to his press pass getting revoked, he was met with heavy criticism from several of his followers who saw Fox's decision to show solidarity with CNN as a clear betrayal of President Donald Trump. And you can check out some of those fun reactions included in the story. I think, in fact, that's the balance of the story. Guess what? They are embedded tweets from angry Donald Trump fans. And, do we spend a great deal of time on that? Let's see. First, tell me where the First Amendment guarantees you access to anyone and anywhere. Again, show me in the Constitution where it says, and there's no room for interpreting the Constitution. There's no such thing as a press pass. Okay, sure. Let's see. Fox equals CNN. Fox is moving more liberal because the owner's liberal sons are running it now. Done with Fox. The time has come to find a new voice for Republicans. I think it's great if they fall apart that way, and if they lose their viewership, so much the better. Not too much more here that's particularly worth anyone's time in terms of rounding up Republican reaction, but I thought you'd be interested to know that that story was out there. Let's see. One more, I guess we'll cram in just before the break, just indicative of where we are these days as a country, I guess. Brief report here. I don't know how brief it is. I'll make it brief because we're coming up on a break. In the Baltimore Sun, man shouts, "Heil Hitler, Heil Trump." Of course, that's what everybody says. During an intermission at the Baltimore performance of Fiddler on the Roof. Of course, calculated, it's exactly the place where you would want to hear somebody stand up and yell, "Heil Hitler." But it's not just that he shouted that. It is, it's this. The opening paragraph here by Christina, Tkachik, Tkacik. Wow. Did not see that one coming. A man shouted pro-Nazi and pro-Trump salutes during a performance of Fiddler on the Roof. Or, in fact, I had just thought it was just during the intermission. But okay. During a performance of Fiddler on the Roof at Baltimore's Hippodrome Theater on Wednesday night, in an outburst, here's the key part, that some audience members feared was the beginning of a shooting. Yeah, apparently everybody hearing that began scrambling for the exits, thinking that the next thing was going to be the guy starting to spray bullets. Audience member Rich Scher said the outburst happened during intermission, so we are correct about that. Wow, overly powered music there caught me by surprise. Let's turn it down a little bit. But Rick Scher said the outburst happened during intermission. The man who had been seated in the balcony began shouting, "Heil Hitler, Heil Trump." Immediately after that, people started running, Scher said. I'll be honest, I was waiting to hear a gunshot. I thought, here we go. And wow, that'll tell you an awful lot about where we are as a country. Chris Hayes commenting on this thing. Just so weird how people connect Hitler and Trump that way. So odd. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring, monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. We will continue with our haphazard roundup of the news. Lots to get to today. I mentioned the leadership contest and the speakers contest in particular. A little earlier in the show, we had Matt Fuller revealing that there were, as he said, multiple Democratic members who publicly support Pelosi, speculating to him on background that she might not actually have the votes to win this. I assume she would have the votes inside of the caucus to get the nomination ordinarily, but I guess it will now depend on whether or not members inside the caucus who otherwise support Pelosi come to believe that there are enough Democrats willing to vote against her or for someone else on the House floor that they throw things into chaos and into a second round of balloting, and that they want very badly to avoid that appearance of, Dems in disarray. And I guess people could come then to speculate that, well, if I want to avoid that, do I believe, one, that can happen? Two, do I believe that Nancy Pelosi would rather give up the speakership than have that happen, even if she were to win on the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 15th, 29th, whatever ballot? And do I think that the best thing for us is to avoid that fight, even if it means selecting someone for the speakership that I don't prefer the way I do prefer Nancy Pelosi? So it's up in the air. I guess you have to consider the possibility that could happen, and then, try and calculate the odds of it, and try and calculate the odds of Nancy Pelosi believing it, and likewise telling people, okay, well, if I believe this is going to happen, then this is the thing we ought to do for the good of the at this point, both the party and the country. But I don't know that she really believes that, and it's hard to evaluate that possibility. And just to make it harder, we can share what was news yesterday anyway. And, this is fresher news, so you give it perhaps a slightly more weight, what Matt Fuller was reporting. But yesterday's news, as reported by Politico, and Greg mentioned this one briefly, I think, in passing yesterday. But just to reiterate, the story ran under the headline, Pelosi's campaign for Speaker hits snag. Oh, no, maybe I think they've changed the headline on this one. Pelosi's campaign for Speaker hits snag as potential challenger emerges. I believe they've probably updated. Yes. This was updated as of 9:30 p.m. last night. The headline, I don't know if the headline matched the tweet, but the headline, I guess, used to be Pelosi swats at Moulton and guarantees she'll be Speaker. So that's a pretty significant headline change as between the morning version of what was in Politico and the evening version. Rachel Bade and Nolan McCaskill wrote that story, and that's an interesting change, to say the least. And the new name that's emerging is Ohio Democrat Marcia Fudge, a well-respected member of the House, and she says she's considering a bid. But again, if you looked at the money, that's always been the best indicator so far of who would win those contests. Although usually the contest is for leadership positions, and that's simply an internal caucus leadership position, that is. And that's simply a vote of the caucus. It doesn't involve the additional step of installing her as a constitutional officer with a vote on the floor. And that complicates things, though, it hasn't in any real way, since 1923, when that's the last incidence of multiple balloting in a speaker election. So we don't have a great deal of experience with what happens in those situations, and the leadership pack, the leadership packs as leadership packs anyway are a relatively recent phenomenon. Packs haven't been around for all that long in terms of the timeline of our history as a country. So maybe there's just not enough to go with there. Anyway, that headline change makes a difference. I think I had originally grabbed it for my own purposes, even after Greg had summarized it, for that part of the headline that tells us that Pelosi swats at Moulton. I had intended to hold that up for its contrast to what happened as between Pelosi and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez the other day. More on that in a few minutes, but I meant to hold that up by way of illustrating that she was working hard, Nancy Pelosi was, and Alexandria Ocasio as well, both working hard to put out the message that they were working in concert, at least eventually, and in harmony, and that Pelosi was declining to take the opportunity to swat at her, but was happy to take the opportunity to swat at Moulton, which indicated to me that Pelosi viewed Moulton as a threat to her speakership, but not Ocasio-Cortez, not because she was somehow incapable of taking the job from her now or one day. I mean, I don't think actually she's probably not capable of taking the job from her now. I think we can flatly state that that's the case, but that she wasn't moving in that direction. That wasn't what she was up to. That wasn't how Pelosi viewed her activity, and that was an important distinction to make. Let's take a look, though, at this story to see how things have changed and what we might add to the picture. A potential challenger to Nancy Pelosi emerged on Wednesday as her critics worked behind the scenes to try to deny her the votes to be Speaker. Former Congressional Black Caucus Chairwoman Marcia Fudge of Ohio told the Cleveland Plain Dealer that she is considering a bid for the gavel. Fudge, who has signed a letter vowing to oppose Pelosi on the House floor, does not believe the California Democrat can clinch the 218 votes needed to return to her old position. People are asking me to do it, and I am thinking about it, Fudge said. I need to give it some thought and see if I have an interest. I am at the very beginning of this process. It's just a discussion at this point, and you're allowed to have that discussion. You have to allow for it. I am not certain what it is that drives her opposition to Pelosi. But again, the usual rule of thumb here is this could be an unusual situation or a unique situation. But there are an awful lot of members of the House Democratic Caucus who owe some part of their election to support from Nancy Pelosi and the rest of the current House Democratic leadership team. And it may be that Marcia Fudge does not. That's entirely possible. It may be that she does, but, asks, what have you done for me lately? Or maybe just a matter of, the conservative Democrats who want Pelosi ousted don't have a candidate that they can put forward and win the majority, even of just Democrats voting for the position. But it may be the case that new members, more liberal, more progressive members, may not necessarily know the nuances of where every other member of the caucus stands and where they come from in terms of their position on the progressive to conservative spectrum. And while it might, this is oversimplifying the thought process of our new members here, but I wonder whether people think that it's possible that they might be initially reluctant to replace Nancy Pelosi with an old white guy, whereas if they were presented with an option of a person of color, and particularly a woman of color, that they might be more comfortable with that. I don't know that. I don't know that much about Marcia Fudge, and I don't know that much about Seth Moulton either. But I don't know what would bring the two of them together, other than the conservatives who are looking to oppose Pelosi probably have calculated, possibly correctly, that incoming members like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez probably occupies a significant portion of their thoughts at this point, might be tempted to vote for a woman of color and not have the opportunity to evaluate where she is on the spectrum and where are the people who are putting her forward, who are encouraging her to step forward and put her name in for speaker, stand on that spectrum. But, they may also be extremely sophisticated players. You could make a lot of mistakes assuming too much about the simplicity of incoming members or longtime members for that matter. Fudge's announcement, we'll continue with this story, comes as a tug of war within the House Democratic Caucus over the next Speaker of the House kicked into high gear on Wednesday. Pelosi leaned on incoming Democrats who've signaled a desire for new leadership, and her critics implored them to hold firm. Fudge is among 17 incoming lawmakers and incumbents who have signed on to a yet-to-be-released letter vowing to vote against Pelosi on the floor. That's at least very clear about what it's promising. It's a major problem for the Californians' campaign to recapture the job. The letter does not include signatures from several other incoming freshmen, and we got to get rid of that term, who've said that they will not back Pelosi on the floor, but who have said they will not back Pelosi on the floor, but who are uncomfortable signing at the moment. Okay, so it's not a question of whether they are unsure about whether they would cast a different vote in the caucus versus on the floor, as I thought might be the case. Pelosi vowed Wednesday morning in no uncertain terms to vanquish her opponents and her allies believe they can pick off the lawmakers on the letter with promises of committee posts or other prime positions. That is standard operating procedure, after all. Asked about Representative Seth Moulton's suggestion Tuesday night that he is 100% confident that she does not have the votes, Pelosi deadpanned, "I'm a busy person, but I will be the Speaker of the House no matter what he said." But Pelosi's critics argue that their numbers are growing, not shrinking, and they're trying to encourage the fresh people, many of whom avowed on the campaign trail not to support Pelosi or promised to vote for new leadership, not to cave to the arm-twisting tactics Pelosi has perfected over 3 decades in Congress. And, of course, arm-twisting is variously also known as cat herding, and a skill much admired in many cases. They should not be asked to walk the plank on the first vote, to break a promise on their first vote, said Tim Ryan, who ran against Pelosi for Democratic leader in 2016 and has framed the rebels' bid to oust Pelosi as an effort to protect the party's new majority. When you win saying one thing, you can't come down here and have the leadership ask you on your first vote to go back on your word. Of course, there were probably a lot of words on the campaign trail, and people are very often willing to forgive an awful lot. And I doubt very much, it's really not that much in the way of solid evidence that people owe their election to Congress in great numbers to their willingness to oppose Nancy Pelosi. She just wasn't that big of a factor in races where Democrats won. But okay, in some, I guess they were. And some of the hardcore opponents, I'm sure it made some bit of difference. While the decisive floor vote on the next speaker isn't until January, the lobbying campaign is in full force. Pelosi huddled with the bipartisan Problem Solvers Caucus. Yay. Sorry, fell asleep there for a second. And put out a press release promising to work with it on reforms to decentralize power to rank-and-file members. She also met with the Congressional Black Caucus, whose leader, Representative Cedric Richmond of Louisiana, recently floated the idea of having a CBC member challenge her or Steny Hoyer for the number 1 or number 2 position. She's been very active, Representative Gwen Moore of Wisconsin, a CBC member, said before Fudge revealed she might run for Speaker. "I don't know where Pelosi gets the energy to do all that she's done. I'm curious as to who thinks that they can rival her. So I'll be very eager to see who this shadow candidate is." Well, now we know. The Pelosi debate also spilled into a Wednesday afternoon caucus meeting when Democrats discussed the rules changes that Pelosi's critics are seeking. Representative Ed Perlmutter of Colorado, who opposes Pelosi for Speaker, stood to advocate for a proposal that would allow members to vote for whomever they want on the House floor for Speaker. And, I guess that's worth pointing out that it's very much frowned upon to vote against the person nominated by a majority, or at least by the plurality of the caucus. Again, it's basically a primary, and they all have been through this, and they all were perfectly willing to demand that Democrats in their home districts fall in behind them when they won the primary, despite however many people there were challenging them for that nomination. And it's a little strange, but not beyond the pale, I guess, to see them arrive in Congress and abandon that principle. Democrats are currently bound by caucus rules to vote for whomever wins the nomination for Speaker. The question of what to do with people who don't, well, that's not often needs to be addressed. But when it does, you don't do very well in asking for favors from the leadership after that, usually. The nominee is decided behind closed doors in a secret ballot vote and requires only a simple majority of members to clinch. It's a much lower threshold than is needed on the House floor, where a small number of Democrats could conceivably block Pelosi. Pulling out a copy of the Constitution, oh boy, Perlmutter argued that such rules go against the founding principles of the nation itself, I tell you. But Representative-elect Katie Hill of California challenged Perlmutter on why the rule needs to be changed since it's not enforced anyway. See, she suggested that Perlmutter was raising the issue to make hay. On behalf of the freshman class, that could be dangerous, I would like for all of us to move forward, she said. Oh, that's easy enough. According to sources in the room. Well, moving forward, they're probably going to get agreement on that. Representative Zoe Lofgren, who allegedly pronounces her name as Zoe and not Zoe, but I've never spoken to her about it. Though she's been around long enough, you'd think I'd have figured this out by now. Then stood to tell the incoming new members, there's an awful lot of the... Are people offended by the term freshman? I mean, I always got the sense that they were, and it was a little bit after my time that people at college campuses began moving to first-year student instead of freshman, but that has never caught on. Of course, they're not students in the context of Congress, but I wonder whether that's, one of the smaller issues out there, and whether current thought is, bigger fish to fry, say freshman if you need to. Just curious. I don't love it. But okay. Pelosi's critics, meanwhile, have been trying to buck up the incoming new members who are considering voting against Pelosi. Representative Kathleen Rice, a New York Democrat who opposed the Californian on the House floor last year, seethed at the suggestion that incoming new members would get in trouble for not backing Pelosi on the House floor should she win the nomination in caucus, which is almost certain. Interesting. Again, Kathleen Rice, somewhere in her record, has the old, well, now I've won the primary thing and you all need to fall in behind me, but not for this. Sure. The untenable situation that we are giving all of these new members, she says, her own words, new members, is saying you either violate the caucus rule and then try to make it seem like there's a consequence to that. There isn't. Nothing happened to me. Or you keep your campaign promise, Rice told reporters. And, of course, not all of them promised that, and not all of them promised that they would oppose her for Speaker on the House floor, but rather would look for new leadership, whether they preferred new leadership. Rice also complained, Rice also complained about Pelosi allies trying to frame her bid to reclaim the gavel as an issue of women's empowerment and gender. Pelosi allies have singled out newly elected women, especially in their pitch to keep a woman in power, according to multiple sources familiar with their efforts. I wonder whether that had anything to do with casting about for a woman to oppose her in the name of even the more conservative members of the House. And I have seen people tweeting around this morning that Marcia Fudge apparently had never supported what were we talking about? He said the Equality Act. Is that? But I'm not even certain I have the name correct because I don't have the tweets in front of me. But are we talking about? Is she not a marriage equality supporter? Is that the equality we were talking about? I'm not positive about whether that's the case or not. But apparently, she raised some eyebrows in the past by not being on the progressive page across the board, if that's something that disturbs you. And I am sure that many of you would be disturbed by that. Not necessarily that she doesn't toe the progressive line on every issue, but this particular issue, I better be sure I have the issue right. Anyway, I just want to put that out there too. I have seen those comments made. I haven't rounded them all up just yet. But they should not, the story continues with a quote from Rice here. They should not be made to feel that they are anti-women if they don't want to vote for Nancy Pelosi. Fair enough. Rice said, I don't think that's fair to put all the incoming women in that position when you're telling them if you're not going to support her, you're basically betraying your gender. That's just not true. They should be treated with more respect. Of course, one way to treat them with more respect is to simply assume that they know that that's not what they're being asked to do and leave them alone about that. I don't think they need any defending there, but I suppose if you wanted to lend them a hand, you could do it, but you could do it in a way that's maybe a little less pandering than that. A challenge to Pelosi by Fudge would complicate the current leader's pitch to members that they need to keep a woman in power. Fudge could also give lawmakers currently on the fence about Pelosi more comfort voting against her. Now, I guess they have a name to pin things to. Currently, rebels have offered no alternative to Pelosi, which has undercut their sway with some members. The 66-year-old Fudge was first elected to Congress in 2008. She did stints as a local politician and prosecutor before coming to Capitol Hill. She's regarded in Congress as a tough and smart lawmaker. While Fudge has been mentioned as potential speaker material, she supported fellow Ohioan Ryan for minority leader over Pelosi in 2016. She has also talked up South Carolina Democratic Representative Jim Clyburn, the highest-ranking African-American lawmaker in Congress, for the top post. The entire Pelosi debate is clearly making some new members uncomfortable. Not surprising. Representatives-elect Elissa Slotkin and Abigail Spanberger exited the caucus meeting together and bemoaned the constant questions and calls and texts about Pelosi. Jennifer Wexton, who beat Virginia Republican Barbara Comstock last week, repeatedly dodged questions from reporters about how she'd vote on Pelosi, only to later tweet her support for the leader. That's about where I figured she would come down on this one, and I'm fine with that. I look forward to talking with my colleagues in caucus about that. She told reporters, I know that Leader Pelosi has been the leader for many, many years and has accomplished many, many things. Representative-elect Susan Wild of Pennsylvania, who said she's been receiving a regular stream of texts, emails, and phone calls from people regarding leadership elections, said it's important that top Democrats lay out a plan of succession before members vote. Pelosi, Steny Hoyer, and Jim Clyburn are all in their 70s and have been leading the caucus for more than 15 years. I think it's very important that there be a succession plan in place if Pelosi is elected so that we are grooming people for leadership who are as diverse as this incoming new class is, Wild said. That's called the rest of the leadership there, Susan, and that's what we use it for. And people move up just like a ladder for that reason. They are elected to the spots they're chosen to fill and sometimes appointed to those spots where appropriate, precisely for that purpose. I don't know why anybody thinks that's a new idea, but okay. Pelosi this week has been deploying all her political power to lobby incoming lawmakers for support, tapping outside groups with deep pockets and Democratic leaders from John Kerry and Al Gore to governors of their respective states to make her case. And she's had a long time to make those relationships, right? On Wednesday, a swath of labor groups endorsed Pelosi, adding their names to a long list of women's groups, progressive groups, and other organizations that have joined Pelosi's show of force pressure campaign. Her allies in Congress have been sending around letters to colleagues and disseminated press releases backing her as well. Pelosi's critics have been trying to persuade many incoming new members to stick to their campaign promises, to vote for new leadership, a commitment they made after being attacked by Republicans as being Pelosi puppets. And that's a pretty important thing to keep in mind here, is that a lot of, some unknown number, I mean, maybe it's zero, but some unknown number of members who have on record comments that they would be open to new leadership or that they are hoping for new leadership said so in order to get out from underneath what they thought was the threat of being accused of being a Pelosi puppet by Republicans. And that threat or that accusation just doesn't mean anything to most people. Republicans and Trump fans and Fox News viewers believe that's a huge negative. And again, I think their having worked the ref on these things makes nervous Democrats, that's to be read all Democrats, worried that something. But the election is over. And, a lot of people likely said, look, she has to say this in order to beat this Republican. And that was never true, but they thought it was true, but they thought it was true for the duration of the election. And the election's over. And it's not clear how many members feel the same way. Anyway, the group hoping to pressure new members who likewise, by the way, I mean, it's their accusation, well, we can't have it be the case that the first thing they come in and do is be pressured by the speaker to break their campaign promises. Well, we also probably shouldn't have it be the case that the first thing they're asked to do is take this one sometimes minor concession that they made under duress to Republicans that they feared might be able to otherwise beat them and define their term of office and define the entire party along the way under the threat of this. They're to be blackmailed by something that they basically said to neutralize a meaningless stupid threat from the other side can't really, everything else is out the window. Or, I'm sure in some minds, what if I'm wrong? What if I oppose Pelosi, but Pelosi prevails, and now here I am, a lowly new member, looking for ways to influence the Congress and bring back whether it be bacon or anything else for my district, and now I'm being shut out of good committee assignments. I have no chance at entering the leadership path while she's here, and all because I listened to some idiots who are not from my district tell me that the people in my district really, really needed me to stand by my campaign pledge, when all it was an offhanded comment of, hey, you can't pin me to Nancy Pelosi. Now let's continue with the debate. You and me, we're the ones who are here, not her. Well, people could feel that way too. And we'll see how many feel which way, I guess, in the next coming weeks. Pelosi allies, the article continues, have convinced several incoming new members not to sign on to the rebels' letter, cautioning them that such antics could land them in trouble, and we don't know exactly how explicit they were about that, with leadership and starting them off on the wrong foot. That's just basically true. Still, the margin for Pelosi could be close. I don't think it's a slam dunk for Pelosi, said Representative Jerry Connolly of Virginia. The math is what it is. Nancy will do everything in her power to get there. The math is what it is. And by the way, a weird way of quoting this. It's, quote, I don't think it's a, unquote, slam dunk for Pelosi. What, did he not use the word slam dunk? Did the writer just absolutely require that slam dunk be used? I don't know. All right, well, for whatever reason, slam dunk. Everyone loves talking about dunking. And so I guess that was the reason that they hammered it into that shape. All right, we are halfway through the show. We'll take a brief break. I'm a little bit behind on the music, so I'm watching the clock. We'll exit at an unusual point in the music, but when we come back, the decision about whether or not to head into the Facebook rabbit hole. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Once again, nearly forgot that I have to watch the clock and not listen to the music since it was a little bit late. Okay, so let's see. There's that. There's some commentary on these issues that has come in over the last couple of minutes here. Let's scroll back and try and take it more or less chronologically here. This is a totally different issue. We'll have to set that one aside for the moment. A correction, first of all, Culture of Truth, Bob will speak, telling us Avenatti has not been indicted, only arrested. Yes, it would be a little early for the indictment. Arraignment, perhaps, but only arrested. Yeah, okay. And that's an important distinction. For Avenatti, it certainly is. But since we weren't paying any real attention to the story, okay, no harm, no foul. But yes, the correct terminology, he's been arrested, and we don't know that there's any truth to the allegation at this point. I don't know whether I really care about the story beyond that, but let's at least get the part about it that I cared to report right. Okay. Let's see. Pete B2 suggests a talking points memo entry from the man himself, I believe, Josh Marshall. Do the Dems need Nancy Pelosi? So perhaps we'll consider that one in due course. Further commentary, though, from Culture of Truth here, saying Fox News supporting CNN's suit is not surprising. It's the flip side of Acosta not being permitted to sue for defamation. Let me think about that. All right, not surprising. The flip side of Acosta not being permitted to sue for defamation. I don't know why that would be the case. But I agree that it's, for whatever reason, I guess I wasn't shocked that Fox News would do it, but I mostly thought it was them just sort of maintaining the veneer of a news organization. It would be the minimum that would be expected of them if they were a real news organization. All right. One other comment, though, this time directly on the Pelosi issue, again from Culture of Truth. I don't know if Nancy Pelosi was or was not a factor in recent House races, but I do know that nationwide, Democrats did incredibly well in recent House races. And yeah, to me, I take that as a sign that Nancy Pelosi wasn't a big enough factor in most races. Certainly not in most races where Democrats won, but in most races, period. I mean, the whole point of, like, for instance, all of Greg's discussions about what a wave is, that we're in position to at least have some breaks, most of the breaks fall our way, tells me not only that Donald Trump is a terrible drag on the Republican ticket, but and on Republicans everywhere. I guess it's not a ticket per se here, but that the stomping and huffing about Nancy Pelosi doesn't hold any sway here either. If it did, there would be a lot less likelihood of a wave election, and a lot fewer of these things would have broken in our direction. So I think that this was always a weak claim, and that I'm certainly biased and against their direction, but it just doesn't hold a lot of sway with me. It doesn't seem to jive with the facts on the ground and the data on the ground. Let's see. I just happened to see at the moment Paul Waldman commenting. Let's see if this helps. The anti-Pelosi forces would be more compelling if they could offer, one, a complaint besides Republicans hate her. That's true. And the utterly meaningless, it's time for new leadership. And that, you get the point there. And two, an argument for why a specific other person would do a better job as speaker. I would generally agree with that. That would be necessary to get my vote to change. So I assume that there are a lot of other people who feel the same way. All right, let's see. There was the Pete's suggestion of, do the Dems need Nancy Pelosi? And let me just check back on the order in which I had intended to offer things here. Okay. Maybe we'll take a crack at that and take a look. How long does Josh go on here is the big question. All right, maybe we can add this to the mix. Josh Marshall commenting, I wanted to share a few thoughts about the House Democrats' leadership election. First, I'm ambivalent about Nancy Pelosi becoming Speaker again. Turnovers in leadership are good. The dozens of new House Democrats converging on Capitol Hill this week visibly shows the power of generational succession. The Democrats' current House leadership has been in place for more than 15 years, an extraordinary length of time by historical standards. There's a separate matter. Somewhat like Hillary Clinton, Nancy Pelosi has been so consistently vilified and caricatured by national Republicans that she has become, objectively, a highly charged figure as the face of national Democrats. We can lament that, think it's the product of things that are vicious and unfair. I do. Me too. But that doesn't make it not true. That doesn't make it not true, but it doesn't make it true either. It's not true that she's a villain, but it's also not necessarily true that Republicans really believe what they say about her, nor is it true that Democrats believe that they believe that Republicans believe these things, or that it would matter in any way. You know what I mean? Probably not. I've mangled that. I think you can discern what I mean out of that, though. At the same time, there are very few people who understand the inner workings of the House, what caucus leaders do, and what she managed to get done between 2007 and 2011, who don't think she's a legislative leader of extraordinary ability. She also has critical support from a broad array of the party's different factions in and out of Congress. As important as anything, Pelosi is tough, something particularly important facing Donald Trump for the next 2 years. I make these points simply to put my own cards on the table. The relevant point to me is that it's not clear what the small anti-Pelosi faction plans for day 2. What happens after Pelosi gets knocked out of the leadership contest, other than a highly divisive leadership fight with no good consequences at all. I'm going to pause for just a second here in this reading to note something that just occurred to me as I was reading this very paragraph. A lot of the anti-Pelosi faction could be motivated by people looking to get out from under the burden that they've had to bear since opposing Pelosi in the past. I don't know what originally drove their opposition to Pelosi, but it has no doubt been compounded by the fact that they are out of favor with the leadership. And it may be that the chief interest they may have in all of this is getting rid of the leadership that they view as keeping them down, more so than here's what I think will happen that's positive, what someone else brings to the table that Pelosi can't bring to the table. What they're really concerned about here is, I'm ambivalent as to who leads the Democrats because whatever. I don't think we're going to win any tremendous victories in the face of Trump's intransigence, but I will be treated more favorably, or at least less unfavorably, by a different leadership that doesn't hold a grudge against me. And that's a real thing, but I don't know if it's necessarily worth upending democratic unity, such as it may be perceived to be anyway, in order to get that. But, they're making a selfish calculation. What can you do? It's what they're there for. It's what they're there for. Okay. What I most want to discuss, Josh continues, is that it's easy to get a misimpression of what's happening right now. That's clearly true. There's zero question whether Pelosi can get the support to be leader of the House Democratic Caucus. But that's not the question. Because of the peculiarities of how the House elects leaders, the Democrats need close to unanimous support for their leader for her to become Speaker. It's actually because of the peculiarities of how the House elects one particular leader, the Speaker of the House, not anyone else. So that means between 10 and 20 members can block Pelosi from becoming Speaker, even if she has overwhelming support from within her caucus. Although, I guess we should also remember that that's not necessarily the case, but it requires some machinations. And remember, a couple of days ago, we noted that it has been the case that the House has decided to go with the winner by plurality in a speakership race at least once in the past. At least that's my recollection. How they managed it, I am not entirely certain that I remember, but I guess now's the time to start looking that up. So just have that on record, if you will. Keep that in the back of your mind. And remember, I haltingly told you maybe kind of sort of something about it first. And then I'll win the big prize, which is nothing. Anyway, where were we with this? It's not the question. Because of the peculiarities, we were talking about that. Democrats need close to unanimous support for their leader to make her Speaker. That means that between 10 and 20 members can block her, even if she has overwhelming support from within her caucus. The other part of the equation, and I think this is the key to Pelosi's strength, is that she doesn't just have opponents from the right of the caucus, mainly Midwestern moderates. She also happens to have opponents on the left of the caucus, members who are more ideologically to the left and more anti-establishment. Yes, that's true. We have mentioned as much. Can those factions agree on a new leader? Oh, they shouldn't. That's hard to figure. I added that they shouldn't. He just says it's hard to figure since they'd each like a leader that looks and thinks like their faction of the party. Which brings us to yet another point. Let's say Pelosi goes down to defeat and you have an open leadership contest, which is won by Representative X. Do the losers in that contest, the supporters of Representative Y, support Representative X on the floor? Basically, they have to. Almost all of them, or else that person can't become Speaker, which is to say that they have to do what the anti-Pelosi faction now refuses to do. Vote on the floor for the candidate that they voted against in the leadership vote. This kind of parliamentary blackmail can easily spin out of control. The best argument for generational change in leadership is not the absolute age of the top three caucus leaders. They are Pelosi at 78, Hoyer at 79, Clyburn also 78. It's rather that they've held the collective reins for so long that they've kept a generation of potential leaders who aren't terribly young themselves, men and women in their 40s and 50s, from gaining the kind of experience and track record that they'll need to take over in the future. We don't know that that's really the case, but that is part of the present problem. There's no tested person really up for the challenge. So far as we know. But there are people that we don't know who's being groomed for what. at this point. The best outcome I can see is one in which Pelosi takes the speakership with some kind of understanding that she will serve as speaker only for the next Congress or some delimited period and add new members to the leadership team now. What I see currently is a tiny number of members, none of whom appear willing or able to contest the leadership themselves, looking for a pliable replacement for Pelosi who will be in their debt. This is a recipe for a divisive leadership battle followed by a weak speakership. That's a bad outcome for the Democrats, and I would argue for the country too. All right. In large part, I would agree with that, except I would dissent in the question of whether or not I don't know what it is. Everyone seems to assume that there's nobody in leadership that there's no inclusiveness efforts. She's actually been enormously inclusive and grooming new leaders. There's a lot of leadership positions out there. Most of them are, generally speaking, useless in terms of gaining recognition as a spokesperson for the party. That's true. I mean, our TV age simply makes it impossible to look past Speaker of the House and Majority Leader and perhaps Majority Whip in terms of discussing who's in leadership and who speaks for Democrats. But there's an enormous number of plum positions handed out, grooming people for various levels of leadership. There are committee chairmanships out there. There are task force leaderships for newer members or younger members that don't have any particular legislative role, but you get a title created for you. The whip organization is enormous and designed for exactly this purpose. There are a chief deputy whip. There's several chief deputy whips. There are regional whips. There are, all kinds of additional whip positions that people move into in the hopes of moving up to the next one and then the next one and then the next one and eventually becoming the whip. And then you're on the big, big part of the ladder. But she's been great at that. I mean, everybody has to fill those positions, but she has been much more active in creating new ones and finding ways to integrate people who want or need some stake in leadership in order to feel included and to bring the factions together as a coherent whole. I don't think she's getting enough credit for what she's done in that. It's the role of the speaker. Other speakers have done it. I just think she's done it more aggressively than most. Although, again, we don't have a huge number of modern era Democratic leaders to point to I say in the modern media age anyway. I mean, really, think back. Who do you have to compare her to? Dick Gephardt, who most people don't even remember at this point. And then like Tip O'Neill, the pre-modern 24/7 news cycle internet era was a very different one. So that, Jim Wright, yeah, sure. There's not a great number. I mean, she's held the reins for 15 years, and maybe that even has something to do with why she's able to last that long. Is she's literally the only one with experience leading House Democrats in this atmosphere, and I think it's an important part of what makes it work and how she's able to do it. All right, I've got one or two other things, I guess, to add to this collection of thoughts, and one of them I forgot to grab. It was from David Neer, but actually, as I recall, his tweet thread on us, it meshed very closely with my own thoughts on it, and my own tweet thread on it, and my own expressed thoughts from the show on it. So maybe that's why I liked it so much, but maybe it wouldn't advance the ball so much. Instead, I have this one. David's was very good. Everyone should go read it, and I will try and find it for you. John Stoehr, I'm guessing is the pronunciation, Stoehr. And John is editor and publisher at the editorial board, which is an organization I'm familiar with, but I don't think I can describe correctly. A contributing writer at Washington Monthly, columnist for the New Hampshire Register. Okay. All right. Well, look, he's got plenty to say. And he had a tweet thread that I thought was helpful and insightful in sorting out the incident for lack of a better term, as between Nancy Pelosi and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And once again, this one too meshes with what I think, and so therefore it's awesome. But here I think he puts it differently, more interestingly, and insightfully. Plus it's organized. All right, first of all, his first tweet, something happened. That is true. At the Capitol on Tuesday to reaffirm my long-held view that liberals should stop believing what conservatives say liberals believe. This is very important on a number of fronts, but chiefly my still open question about whether and why very many Democrats at all truly, when they're alone with their own thoughts, oppose Nancy Pelosi, or whether they simply said they did or would if they got here, and that maybe it was more of an escape mechanism than anything else. Something happened at the Capitol that reaffirms his long-held view that liberals should stop believing what conservatives say liberals believe. That's the kickoff here. One of the biggest obstacles, he continues, in the history of American liberalism has been this tendency among liberals to accept as true things liberalism's enemies say about it and them. Newly elected members of Congress arrived for orientation. Ocasio, he's referring here to her Twitter handle, so Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, spoke at a sit-in featuring about 200 people outside Nancy Pelosi's office. The protest, as it was called, and again, that's in quotes, and it's important. The protest, as it was called, was organized by an advocacy group aiming to raise awareness about climate change and to advocate for more green energy jobs, which sounds like a great thing and is a great thing. But you see immediately what he's getting at here. There was a lot of meaning that was imbued by calling it a protest. And I don't know that the people involved would necessarily have called it a protest. They may even have used that word, but it may have been as using it as a matter of, for lack of a better term. This is what we call things when people occupy this space and try and make their voices heard. Is it a protest, really? Republicans need their ranks and prefer, if our ranks believe that it was a protest. And it worked pretty well. I saw a lot of people who are, I think, relatively level-headed people and who are Nancy Pelosi fans, supporters, and who have found themselves irritated, sometimes rightly, by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and others like her along the way during this last election cycle, fell very quickly into the mode in which they accepted that it was a protest in the traditional sense, and that they were mad. And they have a right to be mad if this was a protest. Shouldn't you be protesting people who actually oppose your position actively on climate change and not people who generally are on the same side as you on climate change? Yes. But were we protesting per se or doing something else for which there's just no particularly good term handy? So back to John Stower's train of thought here. Newly elected members of Congress spoke at this sit-in that featured about 200 people outside Nancy Pelosi's office. The protest, as it was called, was organized by people looking to raise awareness about climate change and advocate for more green energy jobs. This was mana to Ocasio-Cortez, who made history as the youngest woman ever elected to Congress after unseating U.S. Representative Joe Crowley, the former number 3 in the House Democratic leadership. And I think he means number 4, not number 3. And I think he later corrects that if I'm not mistaken. But ignore that part. The 29-year-old Latina had been stumping for liberal candidates across the country, making liberal arguments in unapologetically liberal ways. That she spoke with activists demanding action from leading liberals should have come as no surprise to anyone, anytime, anywhere. But, and I don't think it did, I think people were surprised that it got termed a protest and they just went with that. And that's what he's complaining about here, I think. But then came this bit of disinformation from the spokeswoman of Paul Ryan, to Capitol Hill reporters. Now we get to the genesis of this, the etymology of, I guess, the genesis of the use of the word protest. It's Paul Ryan's spokesperson who set the tone for the entire day. An email in which Ashley Strong, remember her? Ashley, she capitalizes the L and all of that. Well, this is unconventional, Ashley Strong wrote in an email. The incoming speaker is getting protested by one of her freshmen. Again, should be new members, but okay. You get the idea. This is where this idea came from. Protested. It got used. It was in an email. Somebody who has, formal wear, not formal wear, but business wear, because it's not a suit per se. Ashley Strong occupies a position that you're supposed to take seriously and says it's a protest, and so therefore that's it. It's a protest. From this point onward, John writes, Ocasio-Cortez wasn't doing what a young, dynamic liberal legislator does. No. She was protesting Pelosi. Ashley Strong paved the way for every Capitol Hill reporter to tell a story they had been wanting to tell, even though the narrative was based on a falsehood, that this unruly mob can't be controlled. It's Occupy Wall Street. What are their demands? Yada, yada. This narrative drew the ire of liberals who would otherwise have cheered Ocasio-Cortez, or at least what she was advocating for, right? It rekindled the battle between the youngs and the olds, between the, quote, centrists, i.e. the olds, which is not necessarily the case and is a foolish comparison to make, and leftists, the youngs, the avocado toasters, right? It's also a foolish comparison. And between insurgents and the establishment. Ooh, the establishment. Worse, it inspired some liberals to trot out the old and often vaguely sexist nomenclature. Ocasio-Cortez, and I don't mean freshman here, Ocasio-Cortez was grandstanding. She was showboating. She was this, that, and whatever. Too many liberals, accepted as true what liberalism's enemies, Ashley Strong and others, said about it and them. Thing is, when you actually listen to the women, a different picture comes to light. Not only was Ocasio-Cortez doing what young, dynamic, liberal legislators are supposed to do, bring new energy and new ideas and new methods of advocacy, we might add, to the table, she was charting her own course while forging alliances with established powers. I'm going to emphasize that, established powers. Oh my God, the establishment. She created a bridge between an energized under 30 base and the party's leadership. She'll likely be an invaluable ally as Pelosi plots a way forward. But of course, if Pelosi doesn't get to plot that way forward, then Ocasio-Cortez's moves to build that bridge could be for naught. Although, who knows, maybe she'll be able to build bridges with Marcia Fudge or Seth Moulton or Kevin McCarthy, for that matter. But it has yet to be done. Few can say they've accomplished more on the first day, right? That's probably true. Bloomberg reported the incident was a challenge to party unity. The Times said earlier, these renegades may be unwilling to toe the party line. Fox's Laura Ingraham, never listened to her, thrilled at the sight of Nancy Pelosi trying to wrangle newly elected insurgents. None of it was true. As is the case when women rise to power, people are eager. I'm going to be Donald Trump there. They're also very eagle as well. They're like eagles, soaring in their eagerness to project onto them. I did that very well, I think. Not so much the voice as the thought process. People are eager to project onto them what they want to see and are not listening to what they are actually saying. Reporters can be trusted to frame politics in conservative terms. That's what happened. Right-wing media can be trusted to cement the view that the Democrats are a mob and risk overplaying their hand. That's what happened, but liberals ought to know better. Here is what Ocasio-Cortez said to activists, and we discussed a little bit of this yesterday. Here's what she actually said to them, should Leader Pelosi become the next Speaker of the House, we need to tell her that we've got her back in showing and pursuing the most progressive energy agenda that this country has ever seen. And later she said to the news media, one of the things I admire so much about Leader Pelosi is that she comes from a space of activism and organizing. And so I think that she really appreciates civic engagement. What I'm here to do is to support the folks who are here. More after this, but think about that. Think that that's the time, what she took the time to say. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. All right, welcome back now to Kagro in the Morning show here on Netroots Radio. And it was a little awkward to have to take a break there at that point, but let's finish up with John Storr's summation of things. When we left off, or when we took the break, I'll repeat what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was saying to the media about her encounter, however you want to term it, with Nancy Pelosi. One of the things I admire so much about Leader Pelosi is that she comes from a space of activism and organizing. And so I think that she really appreciates civic engagement. What I'm here to do is support the folks who are here. They are climate change advocates who are on site. This is about uplifting the voice and the message of the fact that we need a Green New Deal. And we need to get to 100% renewables. Pardon me. I'm thinking about that as I'm saying it and saying, is that really the goal you want to put out there? I mean, why not shoot for 100%? Go for it. Yeah, 150%. I mean, I don't know whether we can do it or not. It's nothing fantastical about it, but sure, go on. Anyway, ignore that. Need to get to 100% renewables because our lives depend on it. And we are here to back Pelosi up. She didn't say Pelosi, that's bracketed, her up. We are here to back her up. To which Pelosi said, sounds like a huge protest, right? To which Pelosi said, we are inspired by the energy and activism of the many young activists and advocates leading the way on the climate crisis. We welcome the presence of these activists. Whether she means it or not, she says, we welcome the presence of these activists, and we strongly urge the Capitol Police to allow them to continue to organize and participate in our democracy. I.e., let's not have any arrests here. Or at least, let's not have any mistake made about us backing those arrests. Let's not have that. So, John continues, yeah, no. This was not a protest, as Republican Ashley Strong said. It was activism. This was not disunity, it was unity. This isn't the Tea Party. This isn't the conservative party. It's liberal and democratic. Reporters should cover it as such, if only for the purpose of accurately representing reality. What a concept, right? You should cover it the way it actually is because that's the way it actually is and that's what you're supposed to do. But yet they won't do it. But liberals weren't listening either. It's not just conservative reporters or people or liberal reporters who are afraid of conservatives and so report more conservatively. Liberals weren't listening either. They should have been. Instead, they also accepted as true what liberalism's enemies said about it and them. And he then winds up, you know how people do this at the end of their threads. Hi, and thanks for reading this thread. Please share, and please consider signing up for the editorial board, a daily newsletter about national politics. Thanks. Well, that explains exactly what it is. I was thinking of something else. Good. Okay. Easy enough to understand. And then the correction that Crowley was number 4 in the House Democratic hierarchy, not number 3. Well, that's it was well received. Lots of people agreeing with the idea, and I found it to be a strong point that reporters and rank and file liberals alike were too quick, and I mean they have reason to believe the framing, but we're too quick to accept the framing that this thing was a protest. And I thought the strongest point in all of this was to dig down and find out where the terminology came from. It's true that people were going to be able to point to articles and headlines and say, it says, it was a protest. They were protesting Pelosi. Couldn't you find somebody more worthy to protest, like somebody who actually opposes doing something about climate change, someone who actually thinks climate change is a hoax? Shouldn't you be protesting them, not Nancy Pelosi? Well, we weren't protesting them. Oh, yeah, well, this article says you were protesting. Well, that's the wrong word for it. People get stuff wrong in the newspaper all the time. So digging down, I don't know if she's the first one to say it, Ashley Strong. Maybe she got the idea from someone else. But the point is, it's just as powerful it's very convincing as a narrative that the idea that it ought to be labeled a protest comes from Republicans. They would have a tremendous interest in seeing it portrayed as a protest. And it did the trick. And, I guess you could say that brings us around full circle, even though we probably won't get to the Facebook thing. But it brings us back to the idea of, how Russian or anybody else's trolling works. They understand where there are divisions. They understand where there are tensions, for instance, as between people who really got way, way into the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez candidacy for various reasons, and her connection with Bernie Sanders and the work that they did together, and the intersectionality of it all, and the weird ways in which the intersectionalities fracture along the way. Let's see, what am I thinking of here? If I'm not mistaken, I saw somebody mention that, for instance, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie got together to do a campaign swing, which landed them in Kansas in the middle of the primary election among Democrats that gave us Sharice Davids emerging as the Democratic candidate, whom everyone has been at pains to note is a person of color. Do I have all the descriptors together here? Is she part or fully Native American, but also, everyone wanted to note MMA fighter, but a lesbian woman and Native American and all that. I mean, if you were just slapping labels on everything and saying, well, this equals that, then you would think, well, of course, the extraordinarily progressive Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez would have been there for Sharice Davids, but she wasn't. She was there for another candidate whose ideology, presumably, she would have examined and found to be more in line with hers. And, look, these things happen. It's not terribly surprising, but it turned out that it was a regular old white guy. And in Kansas, that might not be a bad idea. But the ideology worked for her, and she wasn't. And this is, I guess, you really ought to be considering this a good thing, right? I've seen a lot of good progressives, but people who have been annoyed for whatever reason, good or bad, by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in general, or Bernie Sanders, perhaps more to the point, jumping on this and saying, well, why isn't she? Well, if she was really progressive, she'd be supporting Sharice. Look at all these boxes she checks off and all of this. Well, what about her ideology? I don't know. I assume it's pretty decent. I'm happy to have her in Congress more so than any Republican. But I mean, I don't know. What if she ends up pissing us all off and then redeeming herself and then losing anyway, like Heidi Heitkamp, for instance? I mean, we've been down this road. We don't know. It's foolish. We were making huge mistakes daily, all of us, in, looking at the labels that gets slapped on. But this tweet storm makes the excellent point that sometimes that label gets slapped on by a troll. Sometimes not. I mean, I don't think that, maybe there were trolls out there who thought that Democrats would be horrified by the fact that she was either Native American or lesbian or an MMA fighter or all three. But just because they have no understanding of where Democrats are mentally, they make that mistake. So, okay, I don't know. I feel like we're all talking past one another here at a time when we really need to perhaps take a breath and take a break and slow down and take a look at what's really happening and who we're really considering here. Here is a response from this morning over at Shakesville. Melissa McEwen responding to Matt Fuller's report. I think this fills things out a little bit here and allows us to continue this discussion. Matt Fuller at the Huffington Post reports the latest on Democrats who want to deny Nancy Pelosi the speakership. And now he's got a full article on it. I only had that tweet. House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi is suddenly in a fight for her political survival, as a group of Democratic detractors is preparing to block her ascent to the speakership. About a dozen incumbent Democrats and a half dozen incoming Democrats are preparing a letter pledging not to support Pelosi on the House floor for Speaker. The members also intend to note another contingent of Democrats who privately say they won't support the longtime California Democrat but won't sign the letter, according to Representative Tim Ryan of Ohio, one of the ringleaders of the effort to block Pelosi. Sources familiar with the letter say there are currently 17 names on it, but the group is trying to get more than 20 members before releasing it. Currently on the letter, though not certain to stay on it, seriously, think about that. It's not certain to stay on it. So the names that they've got: Tim Ryan, of course, Seth Moulton, we know from Massachusetts, Kathleen Rice, who was mentioned earlier, from New York, Ed Perlmutter, also mentioned, Colorado, Kurt Schrader of Oregon, Philemon Vela Jr. of Texas, Marcia Fudge of Ohio, Bill Foster, Illinois, Brian Higgins of New York, Stephen Lynch of Massachusetts, Linda Sanchez of California, my oh my, Jim Cooper, no surprise there, Tennessee, Jeff Van Drew, New Jersey, Joe Cunningham, South Carolina, Max Rose, Democrat of New York, and I've seen some people musing about their discomfort with that and saying, hey, I was for this guy and I didn't sign on for him to start standing in the way of electing Pelosi Speaker on the floor. Anthony Brindisi, also of New York, and Ben McAdams of Utah. There is another contingent of Democrats, including Connor Lamb, who is from Pennsylvania, Dan Lipinski of Illinois, Ron Kind of Wisconsin, Abigail Spanberger of Virginia, Jason Crow of Colorado, Haley Stevens of Michigan, Alyssa Slotkin of Michigan. How does she say her name? Is it Mickey or does she say Mikey? Cheryl of New Jersey, and Andy Kim of New Jersey, who just today, I guess, had the race called for him, at least by the AP, who are seen as likely to vote against Pelosi, but who also are hesitant to sign the letter. There ends the quote from Matt Fuller. And now, Melissa's commentary. A number of Pelosi foes don't want to go publicly official because they are, well, she says, goddamn cowards who know they have no legitimate reason to challenge Pelosi. They lurk in the shadows with nebulous talking points about the establishment and effective leadership, the latter of which falls to absolute rubbish when Pelosi's actual record is discussed. Luckily, I would say at this point you maybe don't want to confront those people with this sort of language, but you're entitled to do it on a blog. We're not face-to-face here. And they're probably not reading it. And I think that they would, they may be moved, shocked back to the correct position when they realize, I haven't really articulated very much. And that may be why they're not signing the letter, too. I mean, just to give people a certain amount of room to change here, they may not have signed the letter because they've already come to the conclusion that, I really don't have anything to articulate about why I oppose Nancy Pelosi. I just wanted to escape from under the Republicans' thumb in a debate once. And I realized that. And why do you think I haven't signed the letter? I'm not a committed opponent of Pelosi. I just needed to get past that problem in debate. And you're here. I'm all set to come home on this. And I really didn't need goddamn coward, no legitimate reason, and lurking in the shadows. And now I'm pissed and I want to go back. And now I have reason to run away. But I don't think Melissa's writing is doing that. And I think that they can get over that. And if they can't, they're too thin-skinned to be there. They won't last very long. But look, we got to get these votes lined up, and soon. Luckily, there are people talking to them in more measured tones, face-to-face, and say, don't worry about it. You're going to get criticism. It happens. No matter what you do, somebody's going to stab you. Don't worry about that. It's okay, Melissa. There's nothing wrong with saying that. So they conceal their names and make the vaguest of arguments, relying on public hostility for any older woman seeking power to serve as the case they refuse to make. Meanwhile, they're skulking around trying to bring other Democrats on board, some of them are not probably, and claiming that they have the numbers to defeat her, to force her out of the contest altogether. That would be molten and declared enemies, of course, who are really doing that. Pelosi's allies, we're going back, I think, here to the HuffPost article here. Pelosi's allies all readily point out that you can't beat somebody with nobody, but Pelosi's opponents are testing that idea. In fact, they seem to think their movement is strengthened without a clear alternative. Well, I guess that's inoperative at this point, since they're now saying, oh, maybe we were wrong about why we were wrong there, and we'll go with Marcia Fudge on that one. The idea is that once Pelosi knows she can't win, she'll step aside, and there would be a new race for the speaker position. Ironically, I think what's happening here is, in the ongoing debate about whether or not their opposition to Pelosi is serious and stands a chance at succeeding, they were cornered by the seemingly persuasive, for whatever reason, argument that you can't beat someone with no one, and you got to have a name, and if you don't have a name, then you're not serious. They tried at first to defend it by saying, well, we were just basically trying to say, look, you're not going to have our votes on the floor. That should be convincing enough for you. We pledged not to do it. If we have the right number of people, you will be embarrassed and lose, at least on the first ballot. And that'll be a big problem, and you don't want that problem to occur. So you should just step aside and let us then get on to the business of selecting a name. Well, you can't beat someone with no one. That's a bumper sticker. We're losing to that. We need to get out from underneath the thumb of that debate point. And so fine. Marcia Fudge. There you have it. I mean, maybe she'd do a great job. I don't know. I think the point is that they offered her up in order to get out from underneath that debating point, which, like I said, was pretty ironic because there are probably a lot of people who they thought was going to sign this letter and that they're trying to pressure into honoring a campaign promise when all it was trying to get out from underneath a campaign debate point from the other side. Letting the other side define you and you agreeing to it coming out of the debate. That's the big problem. Okay. So she concludes with other foul language about these folks, that they are shady effing cowards. They don't have the decency to just choose someone among their ranks to run against her fairly and squarely. See, now that's a tough, hard-nosed point. So then they respond to, oh yeah, Marcia Fudge. And now what do you do? Well, you're still a bunch of shady effing cowards. Well, that's as may be, but you said it was because we didn't have the decency to choose someone, and now we've chosen someone. So you don't have a basis for concluding that we're shady effing cowards, which is just what you were saying about us not having any real basis for concluding that we need a new leadership. Okay, I'm both sidesing this. Anyway, true enough, good enough point, and it has forced them to come up with the name of Marcia Fudge. Instead, they want to push Pelosi out of the way, Melissa continues, in the most craven and undemocratic way possible, except that they're going to vote on it. Anyway, okay, you get the point. Utterly shameful, she says. She goes on to include a couple of her tweets on the subject. What this communicates to me, she says, is that I should never work hard and effectively for any of these Democrats because I'm an old woman whose work they'll regard as trash. Noted. And before you even start, I have had some significant disagreements with Pelosi over the years. I also think she is effing smart. A lot of effings in this. Effective and responsive to feedback, talented at domestic diplomacy, and deserves the job. And that's a perfectly valid way to feel, and I don't dispute it. Additionally, she concludes in the blog post, if your biggest concern right now is keeping Nancy Pelosi out of power, you've really taken your eye off the ball. These folks should be grateful they have someone as experienced and effective as Pelosi positioned to hit the ground running in opposition to Donald Trump and the Republicans. Instead, they're resisting her. And all good points. And I think, man, that really kind of sums it up. But you can see a little additional example of the dynamic that worries me a little bit here is that the pushback on the pushback is getting a little crazy out there too. And I don't think that any blog post or tweets or anything, whether they're overheated or not, are going to make the big difference in calling people home. Everyone understands what's going on here. But a lot that needed to be noted in thinking through how to settle this thing. Here, Mike Elk tweeting the story about Marcia Fudge here. So now I can point with some specificity to the earlier complaint. He says this is scary because, he's tweeting Robert Costa's tweet that he says exclusive, although clearly we can find the information elsewhere. Democratic Representative Marcia Fudge says she's overwhelmed by support as she weighs a speaker bid. That's, of course, in, that's the paper that publishes Robert Costa. That would be the Washington Post. Should we take a look at this? Well, I guess the first thing we ought to do is tell you what we stopped on Mike's tweet for, which was, he says, this is scary because Fudge was one of only 2 Democrats. And I guess if you're running for speaker, this could become relevant. One of only 2 Democrats to vote against the Equality Act. I had the name right. What is the Equality Act? It would extend sexual orientation protections to workers. So there you have it. Can't be fired from your job because of your sexual orientation. Wasn't a marriage equality thing necessarily, but right in the same vein. Not really someone who, that's a, pretty big disqualifier for sitting on top of the Democratic caucus. Not that we can't make some room for some differences, and I suppose I'd have to give you if you're a serious candidate for speaker and there was a serious chance that you would win, I guess we'd have to sit down and have you explain to me, well, why did you oppose that? I need to know whether it's because you thought there was like a fine legal point dispute over the language of the bill that you thought it wouldn't accomplish its ends in some way, or you're a bigot. Which I have trouble just thinking that's what it is. So I'll hear you out. But, it's, you can't ignore it when somebody's bid for the speakership or any other leadership position can be undone with a bumper sticker that easily. But, okay, well, luckily we have the opportunity to give her the chance to explain what was going on there. Let me take a look at Robert Costa's write-up. Democratic Representative Fudge said she's overwhelmed by support as she weighs a speaker bid. This is the latest entry in the sweeps here, posted at 10:35 this morning. So Marcia Fudge said on Thursday she's overwhelmed by the support from many of her colleagues for a possible entry into the race for House Speaker, becoming the first Democrat to publicly acknowledge a challenge to longtime party leader Nancy Pelosi over the last 12 hours. It's just the last 12. I've been overwhelmed by the amount of support I've received, Fudge said in an interview with the Washington Post, adding that there are probably closer to 30 Democrats who have privately signaled that they are willing to oppose Pelosi. Things could change rapidly, Fudge said with a smile as she sat in her office with her phone buzzing nearby. Fudge, 66, former chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, said that she is building a diverse coalition as she mulls a speaker run, talking with allies on the CBC, moderate Democrats, and newly elected members. Some of those moderates, such as Tim Ryan of Ohio and Seth Moulton of Massachusetts, have publicly voiced encouragement. Moulton, a leader of the resistance to Pelosi, said during an interview on CNN on Thursday that Fudge is, quote, the kind of new leader that we need in this party. What is that kind of person? Well, he goes on to say she's in touch with middle America. She understands what the American people want. She's a next generation leader that people will look to and say, that's the future of our party. That's the future of our country. And that's exactly the kind of leader I want to see as our next speaker. I mean, all of that sounds great. I don't really know why a 66-year-old woman is like, that's the next generation. That's kind of the same generation. 70, there's a big difference between 68 and 66 and 78. But the thing is, I am forced to say I suspect that Moulton just thought he should be the speaker, but was pretty quickly convinced that it would just look too self-serving. And after all, he was mostly interested in not remaining under the thumb of Nancy Pelosi. So, no, it's not me. It's not selfishness. It's for our country and our party. You can't believe that I thought it was about me if I'm nominating this woman right here, right? But why? In other words, why have I never heard Seth Moulton say amazing things about Marcia Fudge before? You know, I mean, if the guy had been out there, carrying a torch for Marcia Fudge for years, I'd believe it at this point. But I think in the last 12 hours he realized, can't be me, can't be a white guy. Who do we got? Find me a person of color, a woman of color who's not attached to Nancy Pelosi. Who do you got? Marcia Fudge. All right, Marcia Fudge is the leader our country needs. Maybe she is, but I have my doubts about how he reached that conclusion. While Fudge mulls a bid, several prominent Democrats step forward to back Pelosi, including former Attorney General Eric Holder and other members of the Congressional Black Caucus, including Representatives Bobby Rush of Illinois and Maxine Waters of California. Fudge told the Cleveland Plain Dealer on Wednesday that she's considering a speaker bid and said Thursday that she would make a final decision in the coming days. I won't give myself a hard Friday deadline, but it'll be close to that. Or I'll go home for Thanksgiving and talk to my family, Fudge said. So it's either this Friday or next Friday. That's pretty not hard, I guess. Fudge said it's critical for black women to be in the leadership ranks of Congress, and that's true. And she believes it would send a powerful message to the country and fellow Democrats to elect a black woman from the Midwest to one of the most powerful positions in American politics. Now, I don't have a problem with the fact that Nancy is necessarily at the top of the ticket, but where are we recognized? Fudge asked. Fine. If we're going to have a diverse party, it ought to look like the party. Nobody wants the status quo. Well, nobody wants to say, I love the status quo. I think that's fair enough to say, but, is it the status quo to say, Paul Ryan out, Nancy Pelosi in? That's not status quo. Anyway, if we're going to have a diverse party, it ought to look like the party. No one wants the status quo. People are weary of who we are as a party. Fudge says she'd be a tough foe for President Trump if she chose to run as speaker and won. She said she'd fight him on core Democratic issues, but would also seek to work with a president who she sees as transactional and about winning more than ideology. I've been in government a long time and I understand how it works, and he doesn't. That's all true, I think. So I'd be happy to help him understand how it works, she said. Oh my God, she just said she'd help Trump. I guess you could frame things that way. Of course, by the way, what should we bet? Like $1 million that if she were speaker, that he would say she was a low IQ individual, because you know how it is with him and black women. Anyway, let's see. So that's the status of it. I don't think that there's too much more that we're going to find out here. When asked on Thursday, Fudge has been criticized by Pelosi allies and others about not co-sponsoring the Equality Act. When asked on Thursday about her position, Fudge said they can't find one vote, not one vote that's anti-LGBT rights. Okay. I just don't want to insert it into the civil rights bill. It should be a standalone bill, and I'd support that. Well, that is interesting. I don't know whether I believe it necessarily, but I'm willing to accept it and look into it. Okay. Democrats will vote internally on their nominee for Speaker on November 28th. I figured I'd fill you in on that fact. Pelosi is likely to win that vote easily, but the real test will come in the floor vote by the full House in January, where the margin Pelosi can lose will be much, much slimmer. I think that rounds things out for the day, and we didn't even get to the Facebook thing. I'm thinking about what we're going to be doing next week, and maybe we ought to do the deep diving into the Facebook story then. But by then, it might be old news. It's a week is like a million years in politics these days. Anyway, I thought there was an important theme that emerged, very interesting, from John Stoer's tweet thread. And then, like last night, I was watching the movie Contact last night, and it sort of occurred to me that the same thing was being portrayed even there, in a 1997 movie about a fictional Clinton-era White House. You know the story of Contact, aliens contacting Earth, and I thought they really nailed the way the politics would break down there. But it was interesting that one scene where the Ralph Reed-ish character that Rob Lowe plays says, we shouldn't go forward with these plans because we don't even know if these people or these aliens believe in God, and somehow that is supposed to make sense. Ellie Arroway, right, Jodie Foster's character, says that's nuts. How can you even think that in those terms? And the fictional Clinton White House chief of staff character says, we won't be suppressing any opinions here today. Even then, even fake Democrats, fictional Democrats of the 1990s said, oh, don't let the Republicans hold this one over our heads.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Right? Think about that, right? Even the fictional Democrats of the 1990s said, don't let Republicans accuse us of being anti-religion. Oh my God. And then they'll be able to use it against us, and our polls will go south like a duck in winter. Anyway, stay tuned next for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam. All the great stories coming up next.